He bought a dry oil well for 10 cents. Then he saw a $57 million secret rise from the ground. Fletcher Beaumont stared at the contract, his hands shaking just a little. 10 cents. That was the price. For an abandoned oil well, a wooden skeleton on a patch of worthless land that hadn't produced a single drop of oil in 7 years. The whole territory knew it was a dud. But Clyde Baxter, the banker, the man who squeezed every last penny from every deal, was practically giving it away. Fletcher looked up from the paper. He saw the sweat on Baxter's brow. He saw the man's hands trembling far worse than his own. Something was wrong with this picture. Deep in Fletcher's gut, his engineer's mind was screaming. Men like Clyde Baxter didn't give things away. They didn't sell prime land for less than a piece of hard candy. It made no sense. Why did the banker keep glancing out the window, like he was expecting trouble to come riding over the horizon? And the strangest part, the part that made the hairs on Fletcher's neck stand up. His own name, Fletcher Beaumont, was already written on the contract. In neat, careful ink. Before he'd even said yes. It was like the deal was already done, and he was just the last one to know about it. That first morning, Fletcher stood on his new property. The land was silent. The old wooden frame of the well leaned against the sky, a forgotten monument to failure. But as he got closer, he saw something. Something that everyone else had missed. Fresh tool marks scarred the wood around the opening. The dirt, which should have been packed hard by 7 years of sun and wind, was disturbed. Someone had been here, and they'd been here recently. He peered down into the blackness of the shaft. The morning sun cut a sharp angle into the dark, and for just a second, something glinted. A flash of metal, deep down in the earth. Something that had no business being in a dry oil well. Fletcher felt a cold certainty wash over him. He hadn't just bought a piece of abandoned land for 10 cents. He had walked straight into the middle of a secret that powerful people had worked very hard to keep buried. The real question wasn't why the well was dry. It was what they had hidden down there, and why they were so desperate to make sure it stayed hidden forever. Fletcher's boots crunched on the baked earth as he walked the perimeter of the property. The sun was climbing, casting long, skeletal shadows that made the barren land look even more desolate. He unrolled his leather satchel and took out his surveying tools. These were the instruments that had made his name, back when he was the best engineer in 3 territories, before the work dried up, before the debt collectors started circling his name like buzzards. The well was the center of it all. Its wooden derrick tilted sadly, a tombstone on the prairie. He approached it with the slow, methodical pace that had once built railroads. He knelt by the opening, his fingers tracing the edge of the timber. The scratches were new. Deep gouges in the weathered wood, no more than a few weeks old. "Someone's been working here," he whispered to the empty air. He took a weighted rope from his kit and began to lower it into the darkness. He let the line play out through his hands, counting the feet as it descended into the earth. 10 feet, 20, 30, 40. At 42 feet, the rope went slack. He hauled it up, his muscles straining. The end of the rope was wet. He sniffed it. Not oil. Not the thick, black crude he might have hoped for. It was water. Clean water. His engineer's mind clicked and whirred like a machine. A dry well shouldn't have a pool of water at the bottom. Not in this arid country. Not unless it was being fed from somewhere. Or unless someone had been pumping it in. Deliberately. He rigged up a small pulley, tied his lantern to the rope, and began to lower the flickering light into the shaft. The circle of light crept down the wooden walls, revealing cobwebs and rot. Then, at 20 feet, the light caught something that made his breath hitch in his throat. Pipes. New metal pipes, gleaming in the lantern light. They ran down the side of the shaft wall, secured with fresh brackets. They weren't part of the original well structure. They were an addition, a secret installation, disappearing down into the watery darkness below, down toward whatever had flashed in the sun. His hands tightened on the rope. Someone had gone to an incredible amount of trouble to modify this well. But why? A horse's whinny cut through the silence. Fletcher looked up, startled. A rider was approaching, a woman on a sturdy-looking mare. She wore a worn hat, her dark hair pulled back from a face tanned by the sun. She dismounted with an easy, practiced grace, her boots and weathered dress marking her as someone who belonged to this land, not just someone who owned a piece of it. "You must be the fool who bought Baxter's cursed ground," she said. Her voice wasn't mean, just direct. It held a mix of pity and warning. Fletcher stood, wiping the dust from his hands. "Fletcher Beaumont. And you are?" "Willa Blaine." She gestured with her chin toward the well. "That belonged to my father, before Clyde Baxter cheated him out of it." Fletcher looked at her face more closely. He saw the lines of an old, deep pain etched around her eyes. "What happened to your father?" Willa's jaw set like stone. "The same thing that happens to anyone who gets too close to what's really down there." She cast a nervous glance over her shoulder, as if the empty plains were listening. "You seem like a decent man, Mr. Beaumont. I'll give you some free advice. Fill that hole with dirt, get on your horse, and don't ever look back." But Fletcher was an engineer. He solved puzzles, and this was the biggest puzzle he'd ever seen. He couldn't walk away, not when every instinct was telling him he was standing on the edge of something enormous. Not when the evidence of tampering was so clear. "What aren't you telling me, Miss Blaine?" Willa swung herself back onto her horse, her knuckles white where she gripped the reins. "Ask yourself one question," she said, her voice low and urgent. "Why was a man like Clyde Baxter so desperate to sell this land for a dime?" She paused, letting the question hang in the air. "Then ask yourself why he's been riding past your property. Every single morning, ever since you signed those papers." She kicked her horse into a canter, leaving Fletcher alone in the vast silence, his mind reeling with her words. He wasn't just a fool who'd bought a dry well. He was being watched. Fletcher didn't do any more work that day. He just watched. He positioned himself behind a cluster of rocks 100 yards from the well, his surveyor's spyglass in his hand. The sun beat down, turning the land into a shimmering haze. Hours crawled by. Then, just as the sun began to bleed across the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, he saw him. A lone rider, approaching from the east, just like Willa Blaine had said. It was Clyde Baxter. The banker rode with a stiff, careful posture, trying to look casual, but his head was on a swivel, his eyes scanning every inch of the property. He was looking for something. Or someone. Fletcher slipped behind the wooden structure of the well, peering through the weathered slats. He watched as Baxter dismounted, his movements quick and furtive. The banker walked straight to the well. He knelt down, fumbled with a loose board near the base, and pulled something from his vest pocket. A key. A key to a lock on land that Fletcher now owned. Baxter unlocked a small metal box hidden in a hollowed-out space beneath the board. Fletcher's eyes narrowed. From the box, Baxter pulled out a sheaf of papers. They looked like drawings, and a small leather-bound journal. The banker's hands were shaking violently now. He spread the papers on the ground, his face growing ghostly pale in the twilight. Fletcher strained to hear. "The measurements are wrong," Baxter muttered, his voice a panicked whisper. "They're all wrong. They should have reached it by now." Reached what? Fletcher's mind was racing, putting the pieces together. The hidden box, the secret documents, the measurements and calculations. This well wasn't a well. It was a landmark, a secret post office. The fresh tool marks, the new pipes, the water pumped into the shaft. It was all connected to the information on those papers. Baxter stood up and began to pace, counting his steps. 10 paces north, 5 paces west. He consulted his drawings, then paced again. He was searching. He stopped 15 feet from the well opening and did something truly bizarre. He knelt, pressed his ear to the dry, cracked earth, and listened. For a long minute, he was perfectly still. Then, he shot to his feet, his face transformed. The fear was gone, replaced by a wild, manic excitement. "It's still there," he breathed, the words carrying across the still evening air. "After all these years, it's still there." That was it. Fletcher had seen enough. He made his decision. He stepped out from behind the well, deliberately clearing his throat. The sound cut through the silence like a gunshot. Baxter spun around, dropping the papers in a startled heap. His face cycled through a half-dozen emotions before landing on a mask of pure terror. "Mr. Baxter," Fletcher said, his voice calm and even. "Interesting time for a social call." The banker's face turned a sickly shade of yellow. "Beaumont, I was just checking on some old survey work for the county." Fletcher walked slowly toward the scattered papers. He watched as Baxter instinctively tried to block his path, to shield the documents from his view. "Survey work?" Fletcher said, his voice dripping with disbelief. "The kind that requires a hidden key and secret visits after sunset?" "You don't understand," Baxter stammered, his voice rising in desperation. "This is bigger than you, bigger than your little engineering problems. There are people involved, people who don't like interference." Fletcher didn't stop. He bent down and, before Baxter could react, plucked one of the fallen papers from the dust. His trained eye took it all in at a glance. It was a geological survey map, marked with precise depths and angles. But it wasn't an oil survey. The notations, the symbols, they indicated something else entirely. Something far more valuable. Gold. The map showed rich veins of gold, a massive deposit running directly beneath the well shaft. Understanding hit Fletcher like a physical blow. "You've been using my well as a marker," he said, the words coming out slowly as the full picture formed in his mind. "The pipes, the water. You haven't been trying to drill for oil. You've been trying to tunnel, to access an underground gold deposit." Baxter's hand darted toward the pistol tucked into his belt. "Put that paper down, Beaumont. I'm warning you. You're in way over your head." But Fletcher wasn't looking at the gun. His eyes were glued to another detail on the map. A name, written in the corner, identifying the original surveyor. A name that made the entire conspiracy click into place with terrifying clarity. Josiah Blaine, Willa's father. Fletcher looked up from the map, his gaze locking with Baxter's. The banker's expression was no longer desperate. It was the cold, hard look of a cornered animal. "What did you do to Josiah Blaine?" Fletcher demanded. Baxter's hand froze just inches from his gun, because at that exact moment, the sound of hoofbeats echoed across the property. Fast, purposeful. Both men turned as a rider emerged from the deepening shadows. The newcomer swung off his horse before it had even come to a full stop. He was a big man, tall and broad-shouldered, with a weathered face that looked like it had been carved from rock. He looked at the scene, at Fletcher holding the map, at Baxter with his hand on his gun, and his face hardened into a grim mask. "Put the gun away, Clyde," the stranger said. His voice was low and carried the easy authority of a man who was used to giving orders and being obeyed. "We've got bigger problems than one nosy engineer." Fletcher stood his ground between the two men, his engineer's mind calculating. Distances, angles, escape routes. The well was his only real option, a 42-foot drop into darkness. The big man's eyes were sharp, intelligent. They missed nothing. "Jasper Creed," Baxter said, the name coming through his gritted teeth like a curse. "What are you doing here?" "Same thing you are," Jasper replied, his gaze shifting to Fletcher. "Trying to clean up the mess you made 7 years ago." His eyes took in the scattered papers, the raw tension in the air. "Mr. Beaumont, I presume. Looks like we need to have a talk." "About what happened to Josiah Blaine?" Fletcher asked, his voice steady. Jasper's expression darkened. Among other things. He turned his hard gaze back to the banker. Tell him, Clyde. It's over. Tell him what we did. Baxter's face went white. Jasper, no. We agreed. We never speak of it. That was before you got spooked and sold the land to an engineer, Jasper shot back. It was before his daughter started poking around again. The secret's out. He took a step closer to Fletcher, his presence looming in the lantern light. Josiah Blaine found what you're holding in your hand, Beaumont. Gold. One of the richest deposits this territory has ever seen. Enough to make us all kings. Fletcher's knuckles were white where he gripped the survey map. What happened to him? He was an honest man, Jasper said, and Fletcher could hear something in his voice that sounded almost like regret. He wanted to file claims. Follow the law. Pay the government their share. And you had other ideas, Fletcher finished for him, the ugly truth settling in his stomach like a lead weight. Baxter, here, Jasper continued, gesturing at the trembling banker. He convinced a few of us we could do it quietly. No claims, no taxes, no partners, just a secret mine, and all the gold for ourselves. And Blaine refused, Fletcher stated. Worse, Baxter's voice cracked. He threatened to go to the territorial authorities. He would have ruined everything. Jasper's jaw tightened. So we couldn't let that happen. We arranged an accident. A little cave-in at the old silver mine he was working. A tragedy. He spat the word out. The gold was here the whole time, and we've spent 7 years trying to figure out how to get to it without anyone noticing. The weight of their confession was suffocating. These men weren't just thieves, they were murderers, and they had killed for the very gold that lay just 42 feet beneath his boots. The pipes in the well? Fletcher said, the pieces locking together. You were trying to tunnel sideways, weren't you? For months, Jasper admitted with a grimace. But we kept hitting water tables, unstable rock. Every time we got close, the tunnel collapsed. It was a bust. Baxter lost his nerve, decided to sell the land to some down-on-his-luck engineer and cut his losses. You didn't expect me to actually investigate, Fletcher realized. Baxter let out a bitter, humorless laugh. We expected you to drill for oil, find nothing, and ride away broke. We never thought you'd start poking around with ropes and lanterns. Fletcher looked from one man to the other. His life had just taken a sharp, dangerous turn. He was standing on a fortune, but he was also standing in front of 2 killers who had just confessed their crime to him. He was a loose end. So, he asked quietly, what happens now? Jasper and Baxter exchanged a look. It was a silent, cold communication. The kind of look shared between men who have crossed moral lines together and know they are about to do it again. Now, Jasper said, his voice dropping to a low growl, we discuss terms. But Fletcher's mind was already far beyond terms. It was calculating. 2 men, 1 visible pistol, and a 42-foot drop to potential safety. Could he make it to the well before they could shoot? The answer came not from them, but from the darkness. A sharp, metallic click echoed from the shadows beyond the lantern's glow. The unmistakable sound of a rifle being cocked. Nobody moves. A woman's voice cut through the tension. Willa Blaine stepped into the circle of light, a long rifle held to her shoulder. It was aimed directly at Jasper Creed's chest. Her hands were as steady as stone, her face a mask of cold, controlled fury. I've been waiting 7 years to hear that confession, she said, her voice trembling with the weight of those years. Jasper slowly raised his hands. Willa, put the gun down. Let's not be hasty. We can work this out. Work it out? She repeated, her voice laced with venom. The way you worked it out with my father? Her eyes, glittering in the lantern light, never left Jasper's face. I know what you did. I've always known. This was it. Fletcher's moment. While their attention was a triangle of hatred, he had a chance. But what was the right move? Side with Willa, a woman armed and seeking vengeance? Or trust his own skills and risk the well? "Miss Blaine," Fletcher said, his voice low and careful, trying not to make any sudden moves. "How long have you known?" "Since the day they brought his body home," she said, her voice breaking for just a second before hardening again. "My father was the most careful surveyor in 3 territories. He didn't die in accidents." Out of the corner of his eye, Fletcher saw it. A flicker of movement. Baxter. His hand was inching back toward his pistol, slow and silent. Willa was so focused on Jasper, the man who had orchestrated her father's murder, that she hadn't noticed the banker's treachery. "Willa," Fletcher said, his voice sharp with urgency. "Baxter." She reacted instantly, swinging the long barrel of the rifle toward the banker. But Baxter was already moving. His hand closed around the grip of his pistol. A shot exploded in the night, but Fletcher was no longer there. In the split second that all eyes turned toward Baxter, he had moved. He grabbed the thick rope he'd used to lower the lantern, looped it once around his wrist, and launched himself into the black void of the well opening. The descent was a controlled fall, a chaotic slide into darkness. He used his heavy boots to break against the wooden shaft walls, the rope burning his skin. Above him, he heard shouting. Another gunshot ripped through the night, followed by the thunder of spooked horses. 40 feet down, his boots slammed into water. The impact sent a shockwave up his legs, but the water was only knee-deep. He was alive. He scrambled through the murky water, his hands searching for the source of that metallic glint he'd seen from above. He found the new pipes, smooth and cold to the touch. But his searching fingers found something else. Tucked behind the pipes, submerged in the water, was a wooden crate. It was sealed with wax, clearly meant to be waterproof. Hidden. With trembling, frantic fingers, he worked at the seals in the pitch blackness. He broke the wax, pried the lid open. Inside, his hands closed around the unmistakable shape of canvas bags. They were heavy, impossibly heavy. He tore one open. His fingers touched smooth, rounded stones. Gold nuggets, a fortune. But beneath the bags of gold was something else. A leather portfolio, wrapped in oilcloth to protect it from the damp. He pulled it out. This was the real treasure. More maps. Detailed geological reports that confirmed the immense value of the gold vein. And a contract. A contract dated 7 years ago. A partnership agreement to secretly mine the land. It was signed by Josiah Blaine. And 4 other men. Fletcher's blood ran cold as he read the names. Jasper Creed, Clyde Baxter, 2 other names he didn't recognize. And then the 5th signature. The final partner in the conspiracy. A name that changed everything. A name that meant this conspiracy went all the way to the top of the territorial government. Judge Morrison Blackwood, the territorial magistrate. The very same judge who had overseen the official investigation into Josiah Blaine's accidental death and ruled it a tragedy with no foul play. Fletcher shoved the portfolio into his jacket, his heart hammering against his ribs. Just as he did, voices echoed down from the mouth of the well. They were coming for him. He looked up. His only way out was the rope he'd used to come down. But now he held the evidence that could burn down the most powerful men in the territory. A lantern appeared at the opening above, throwing his long, distorted shadow against the wet walls of the shaft. A new rope snaked down beside him. "Come on up, Beaumont," Jasper Creed's voice called down, thick with a false, friendly tone. "Let's talk about this like civilized men." But Fletcher heard another sound, carried on the night wind. A sound that made the hairs on his arms stand up. The unmistakable thunder of multiple horses, approaching at a dead gallop. The cavalry was arriving. And Fletcher had a sinking feeling they weren't here to save him. Everyone who wanted him dead was about to be standing at the top of this well. The approaching riders were getting closer, their hoofbeats a drum roll of impending doom. Fletcher looked at the rope Jasper had offered, then back at the walls of the well. He had to make a choice, and he had to make it now. His engineer's mind, cool and logical even in the face of terror, took over. He felt along the walls of the shaft. The new pipes. They weren't just for pumping water or air. They were spaced perfectly. They formed a ladder. A crude, slippery metal ladder leading straight up into the hornet's nest. It was a terrible choice, but it was his. He secured the leather portfolio inside his coat, buttoning it tightly against his chest. He took a deep breath of the damp, earthy air and began to climb. The metal pipes were slick with condensation, and they groaned under his weight, but they held. Each upward pull brought him closer to the voices, closer to the danger. "Fletcher!" Jasper's voice echoed down the shaft again, this time with a new note of urgency. "The rider's coming! That's Judge Blackwood's men. They're not here to talk. They're his personal cleanup crew. They'll kill all of us if you don't come up now and help us make a deal." But Fletcher had seen the contract. He knew Blackwood wasn't a man you made deals with. He was the mastermind. A cleanup meant eliminating every last witness, and that now included Baxter, Jasper, and Willa. He was 20 feet from the surface. He could hear their voices clearly now. Willa was arguing, her voice sharp and defiant. Baxter was pleading, his words tumbling out in a high-pitched panic. And over it all, the steady rhythmic sound of at least 4 horses pulling up. Fletcher pressed himself flat against the slimy wall of the shaft as a new voice cut through the night. It was a voice he recognized. A deep, authoritative voice that dripped with cold power. The voice he had last heard from the judge's bench in the territorial courtroom. "Gentlemen, Miss Blaine." Judge Morrison Blackwood's voice was as calm and commanding as if he were sentencing a man to hang. "I understand we have a situation that requires a permanent resolution." "Judge!" Baxter stammered, his voice cracking. "We tried to handle it. Beaumont found the papers, the maps. He and you, in your infinite wisdom, allowed him to escape into the very well where we have been storing evidence of our enterprise for 7 years. Blackwood finished, his voice still calm, but with a new, terrifying edge of fury just beneath the surface. 7 years of careful planning, compromised in a single evening by your incompetence. Fletcher kept climbing, moving slower now, straining to hear every damning word. "What do you want us to do, Judge?" Jasper asked, his voice subdued. He knew who was in charge. "What we should have done the moment Beaumont signed that ridiculous 10-cent contract," Blackwood replied. "Remove all witnesses. Collapse the well. It will be another tragic accident. A cave-in. Such a dangerous part of the country for mining." Willa's voice rang out clear and unafraid. "You'll never get away with this, Blackwood. Too many people know I'm here. Too many people know about this well." Fletcher could almost hear the cold smile in the judge's voice. "Miss Blaine, your father had a similar, misplaced sense of optimism. And how did that work out for him?" He was 15 feet from the top. He could see the silhouettes of men moving around the opening, outlined against the lantern light. They weren't just talking, they were preparing. "Bring the charges," Blackwood commanded. "We'll use enough to bring down the whole ridge. Seal this shaft for eternity. Whatever is down there, stays down there." Fletcher's blood turned to ice. They were going to bury him alive. He and the evidence of their crimes would be entombed 100 feet beneath the earth. His hands scrambled for a faster grip on the pipes. He could hear the heavy thud of wooden crates being set down. He could hear the metallic click of fuses being handled. Time had run out. But then, a new voice spoke. It came from the darkness beyond the lantern light, calm and clear and utterly unexpected. "I don't think so, Morrison." It was another woman's voice, but it wasn't Willa. This voice held a different kind of authority, the authority of the law. And as she spoke, Fletcher heard the distinct, chilling sound of a dozen rifles being cocked in unison, surrounding the wellhead. Territorial Marshal Davidson sends her regards, the woman's voice continued, a hint of steel in her tone. And she also sent this, a warrant for your arrest, for murder, fraud, and conspiracy against the United States government. A trap had been sprung, but it wasn't Blackwood's. The territorial authorities had been watching them all along, and tonight, Blackwood had led them right to the scene of the crime, with all the conspirators present. Fletcher paused his climb, clinging to the pipes, realizing the game had changed once again. But it wasn't over. He could hear the judge's voice, no longer calm, no longer in control. It was the sharp, desperate snarl of a trapped wolf. And a trapped wolf is the most dangerous animal of all. The night exploded. The sharp crack of rifle fire shattered the standoff. Shouts, curses, the sound of men diving for cover. Fletcher used the chaos as his shield. He scrambled the last few feet and hauled himself over the edge of the well, tumbling into the dirt as the gunfight erupted around him. He was in the middle of a war zone. Marshal Davidson's deputies had appeared as if from the earth itself, positioned in a perfect semicircle. But Blackwood hadn't come alone. His cleanup crew were seasoned gunmen, and they had already taken cover behind a large supply wagon they'd brought for the demolition charges. Gun flashes lit up the darkness from both sides. Fletcher rolled away from the well and scrambled behind a stack of lumber he'd hauled to the site for repairs. From his new position, he could see the whole scene. Willa was crouched behind a large boulder, her rifle still in her hands, but she was pinned down by the heavy fire coming from the wagon. "Beaumont!" a voice called out. It was Marshal Davidson, a stern-faced woman in her 40s, directing her deputies' fire from behind a cluster of rocks. "Are you armed?" "No!" Fletcher yelled back. He ripped the portfolio from his jacket, holding it up. "But I have the proof! I have the contract!" Judge Blackwood's voice rose above the gunfire, filled with rage and panic. "Kill him! Get the portfolio! Don't let him reach the marshal!" Jasper Creed, clutching a bleeding arm, broke from cover. He charged toward Fletcher's position, his face a mask of desperation, his pistol drawn. He was going to finish this, one way or another. But Willa was waiting. Her rifle cracked once. The single shot was precise, deadly. Jasper cried out, stumbling as the bullet hit his shoulder. He dropped his pistol and collapsed to his knees, his charge ending in the dust. "That's for my father," Willa's voice rang out, grim and satisfied. The momentary distraction was all Fletcher needed. He broke from his cover and sprinted across the open ground toward Marshal Davidson, the portfolio held tight against his chest like a shield. Dirt kicked up around his feet as bullets from the wagon whizzed past his head. He dove the last few feet, sliding behind the rocks next to the marshal, breathless but alive. Marshal Davidson didn't waste a second. "What do you have?" she demanded, her eyes never leaving the wagon, her rifle ready. Fletcher shoved the oilcloth-wrapped portfolio into her hands. He quickly explained what was inside. The original partnership agreement, the surveyor's maps, and the damning signature of Judge Morrison Blackwood, proving his involvement from the very beginning. A grim smile touched the marshal's lips. "This is it," she said, her voice tight with triumph. "We've been investigating Blackwood for months. Anonymous tips about corruption, bribery. But we never had anything solid. Tonight, he delivered himself to us on a silver platter." Another volley of gunfire erupted from the wagon. Blackwood was making a final, desperate stand. But it was hopeless. Davidson's deputies had them outnumbered and outmaneuvered. "Judge Morrison Blackwood!" Marshal Davidson's voice boomed across the clearing. "It's over! You are surrounded! Surrender now, and you will be treated according to the law you swore to uphold." The shooting stopped. For a moment, there was only the ringing in their ears and the heavy breathing of frightened men. Then Blackwood's voice shouted back, no longer powerful, but shrill and unhinged. "I built this territory! I spent 7 years building my empire! I will not see it torn down by a bunch of gold-hungry fools and a 10-cent engineer!" Fletcher watched as the judge emerged from behind the wagon. He wasn't holding a gun to surrender. He was holding a lit stick of dynamite. His face was a twisted mask of insane fury. "If I can't have the gold," he screamed, his voice cracking, "then nobody can. This well, this evidence, all of you, it all ends tonight." Fletcher's engineering mind instantly calculated the variables. The length of the fuse, the size of the charge, the blast radius. It was enough to kill everyone within 50 feet. It was enough to collapse the well, burying the evidence forever. But Willa Blaine saw it too. She didn't hesitate. She rose from behind her boulder, raised her rifle, and fired. The shot was a miracle of speed and accuracy. It hit Blackwood squarely in the wrist. The judge screamed in pain. The lit stick of dynamite flew from his shattered hand, tumbling end over end through the air. It was arcing directly toward the opening of the well. Fletcher didn't think. He reacted. All those years of calculating trajectories, angles, and velocities took over. He launched himself from behind the rocks, diving, stretching, his eyes locked on the sputtering fuse. He caught it. His fingers closed around the stick of dynamite just inches before it would have fallen into the shaft. Without pausing, with a surge of pure adrenaline, he twisted his body and hurled the explosive with all his might. It sailed out into the darkness, away from the well, away from the people. It landed in an empty patch of scrubland 100 yards away, and detonated. The explosion lit up the night, a blinding flash followed by a deafening roar that shook the very ground they stood on. Then, silence. In the flickering lantern light, Judge Morrison Blackwood stood alone, clutching his ruined hand, surrounded by the unwavering rifles of the territorial marshals. His reign was over. His conspiracy was a smoking crater in the dark. 3 weeks later, Fletcher stood at the edge of his property. He watched as a team of government mining engineers carefully extracted the first ore samples from the vein that had cost Josiah Blaine his life. The sun glinted off the rich yellow streaks in the rock. The surveyors had been right. It was one of the largest gold deposits ever discovered in the territory. Judge Blackwood was in a federal prison, awaiting a trial that was a mere formality. The evidence in the portfolio was ironclad. Jasper Creed and Clyde Baxter, hoping for leniency, had confessed to everything, detailing 7 years of conspiracy, corruption, and murder. They were looking at decades behind bars. Marshal Davidson rode up, a formal-looking document in her hand. "Mr. Beaumont, news from the Capitol." Fletcher took the document. It was a commendation from the territorial governor, thanking him for his courage in exposing the deep-rooted corruption that had plagued the justice system for years. "That's not all," the marshal said with a small smile. "The Territorial Mining Authority has finished its preliminary assessment of your claim." She paused for effect. "Initial estimates are that the vein runs for nearly half a mile. At current market prices, they project its total value at somewhere around $57 million. $57 million. The number was so large it didn't feel real. 6 months ago, he was facing bankruptcy, a failed engineer with nothing but his tools and his name. Now, he was one of the wealthiest men in the West. "What about the legal title?" Fletcher asked. "Blackwood and the others had claims on this land." "All fraudulent," Davidson replied curtly. "Obtained through bribery and murder. The territorial court has officially invalidated their claims. You, Mr. Beaumont, as the legal purchaser, hold a clear and complete title to this property and all its mineral rights. It's all yours." Just then, Willa Blaine rode up, dismounting with that same easy grace. But the haunted look was gone from her eyes. It had been replaced by a quiet peace. Justice had finally been served. "The prosecutor wants to see you tomorrow," she told Fletcher. "Your testimony will be the final nail in Blackwood's coffin." "I'll be there," Fletcher nodded. "Your father deserves to have the full truth told." Willa looked at the bustling mining operation, the engineers working under the watchful eye of the law. "He would have been proud," she said softly. To see it done the right way. Legal claims, proper surveys. Speaking of which, Fletcher said. He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a folded paper. I had my lawyer draw this up. He handed it to her. It was a legal partnership agreement. It proposed that Willa Blaine, as the heir of the original discoverer, would receive a 25% share of all profits from the Beaumont Mining Company. She read it, her eyes widening. She read it again, unable to believe the words. 25% of $57 million. It was a fortune beyond her wildest dreams. Fletcher, I can't accept this, she said, her voice barely a whisper. You're not accepting charity, Willa, Fletcher said firmly. You're accepting justice. Your father found this gold. He died trying to do the right thing. It's only right that his family should benefit from his discovery. Willa looked from the paper in her hand to the mine, then back to Fletcher. A slow smile spread across her face. After a long moment, she extended her hand. Partners then, she said. But we do this my father's way. Legal, honest, and fair. Fletcher shook her hand, sealing a deal that would not only change their lives, but would begin to change the territory, proving that even in the Wild West, sometimes the good guys did win. They had taken a conspiracy buried 42 feet deep and brought it into the light. 6 months after that fateful night, Fletcher Beaumont stood in the spacious main office of the Beaumont Mining Company. He reviewed the latest production reports. The mine was exceeding all expectations. The $57 million estimate had been conservative. The vein was richer and deeper than anyone had imagined. He wore the tailored suit of a successful businessman, but he still had the calloused hands of an engineer. His desk was piled with telegrams from investors, letters from equipment manufacturers, and tax documents from the territorial government. The broke, desperate man who had gambled 10 cents on a worthless piece of land was gone. In his place stood the president of the most successful mining operation on the frontier, an employer of over 200 men. A knock on the door, and Willa came in. She was a partner in every sense of the word. She oversaw the company's finances and legal affairs, and had already become one of the most respected businesswomen in the territory. She'd used her newfound wealth to start a foundation in her father's name, providing free legal aid to families who had been cheated by powerful men like Clyde Baxter. The appeals court denied Blackwood's final motion, she announced with satisfaction. He'll die in prison. Jasper and Baxter were sentenced yesterday, 15 years each. Justice was complete. What about the other properties Blackwood was trying to acquire? Fletcher asked. Marshall Davidson is on it, Willa replied. They're using the judge's own records, the ones we found in the well, to return 3 other parcels of land to their rightful owners. Fletcher walked to the large window that overlooked the entire operation. He could see the well that started it all. It was now the central shaft of a massive state-of-the-art gold mine, operating under the strictest safety protocols and paying the highest wages in the territory. Sometimes I still think about that night, Fletcher said quietly. How close we all came to being buried down there with that secret. Willa stood beside him, watching the sunset paint the sky over their shared enterprise. My father always said the truth is like a river underground, she said. No matter how deep you bury it, eventually, it finds its way to the surface. Fletcher smiled. In this case, it literally rose right out of the ground. A 10-cent investment had turned into a $57 million fortune. But it had brought something more valuable than gold. It had brought justice for Josiah Blaine, and a new, honest start for the territory he loved. Fletcher Beaumont, the 10-cent engineer, was finally the man he was always meant to be. If you enjoyed this incredible story of justice and discovery, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, because we have so many more tales of the wild frontier coming your way. And if this story kept you on the edge of your seat, let us know by hitting the like button. Your support helps us keep these amazing stories alive. Thanks for watching.